Hi everyone. Today we are going to introduce some major macroeconomic concepts that are going to take us throughout the rest of the course. But we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. We're going to do it by giving the president a report card. And just because President Trump is so early in his presidency, we're actually going to look at both President Obama, former President Obama, and President Trump. And this isn't going to be a political thing. You're going to be looking at data, and you're going to be the one giving them the grade, not me. I'm just going to sort of present the data to you. So President Trump and former President Obama get up and they go to school, and their first class of the day is full employment. This is one of the macroeconomic goals of any society, which is full employment. Now, what you should realize is that full employment does not mean zero unemployment. It really means, for economists, 4 to 6% unemployment. If you're sort of anywhere between 4 and 6%, unemployment, most economists would say that your economy is running at full potential. And so, when it's not running at full potential, you usually hear things called a recession. And that's defined as 2 terms, or 2 quarters, or 6 months of a decline in real GDP. But more generally, we don't actually we can't ever know that something's a recession until we're past it, because, or at least we don't know when it started, because of data lags. And so sometimes it's just generally known as a decrease in economic activity. So let's see how the 2 presidents are doing and have done. So what we have right here is the unemployment rate from 1960 to January 2017. So here we're going to be looking at former President Obama. You can see that the blue lines are recessions, and right before he came into office, we entered the grips of the Great Recession, and you can see that unemployment dropped from 4.5%, or increased from 4.5% all the way to 10% at the worst moment of his presidency in early 2010. And then throughout the rest of his presidency, the next 6 years, you see a basic trend line steeply down, and so that by the time he left his presidency, it was under 4% again. Okay. Another way of looking at the same information, here are monthly changes in jobs along with the unemployment rate, and you can see that former President Obama looks like he inherited a pretty bad situation here, losing, it looks like 800,000 jobs a month. These are months right here. The economy was losing 800,000 jobs a month when President Bush handed it over to him. And then over time, by early 2010, jobs were increasing, and obviously you see that the unemployment rate went down. So let's take a look at Trump in his first year. You can see that it seems like he inherited 4.6% unemployment, and generally it has been staying the same or decreasing at a very slow rate, right? 4.7, 4.5, 4.4, all the way down to 4.1. So now, our economy is looking very strong with very low unemployment. And so your job when you're giving them a grade, if you go back, is to just think about, is Trump doing something that is uniquely special to get to 4.1% unemployment, which is a fantastic figure, or is the trend line simply continuing? And that's something that you need to decide. One criticism of the Obama presidency was what this graph demonstrates. And it's a new concept that we're adding called the labor force participation rate. This is going to come back in future modules when we talk about unemployment on a deeper level. But the labor force participation rate is basically out of everybody who is able to work, 16 years of age or older, how many of those people are actually looking for work or have a job? And you can see that what critics of President Obama would say is that the unemployment rate really was decreasing because people were dropping out of the labor force. They weren't even looking for jobs. And if you counted all the people who were able to work, the unemployment rate would have been, above 10%, which is quite large. So that's a pretty serious charge. And so let's look at the truth behind it. So it does seem like the labor force participation rate did decline throughout Obama's presidency. And so this is where you need to begin to think about, well, what are some of the causes for that? It could be that because of the, healthcare expansion through Obamacare, it's possible that people felt like they could leave their jobs because they weren't going to be getting their health care through their jobs anymore. They could still get it on open exchanges or on some type of Medicaid expansion. There could have been, obviously there definitely were people who were frustrated by the Great Recession, people in their 50s who just said, hey, I'm going to take an early retirement because I'm not getting hired, etc. But this actually extends all the way through the present moment. And so what you can see here is that from January of 2014 onward, we've pretty much had a stable labor force participation rate. And so I think in order to fully judge President Trump on whether his policies are actually creating lots of new jobs is whether this labor force participation rate starts to go up. Because if it just stays the same, then maybe it's not anything about his policies that are keeping the unemployment rate where it is. So at this moment, you can pause the video and sort of give the two presidents what grade you think that they should get, A, B, C, D, or F. So then they finish up full employment and they go to their second class of the day, which is stable prices. One goal of every economy is to have prices in their economy relatively stable, their currency is stable, and people aren't going to the store and seeing huge price increases day after day, month after month, like we have seen in certain countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela recently. So how do you measure prices? Well, we're going to introduce this concept called CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index. And basically what economists do is they take somewhere between 200 and 1,000 items that Americans typically buy, and they keep purchasing those same items or checking the prices on those items every month through every year moving forward. And by doing that, you can see how prices are changing in the economy, and you can measure something that we call inflation. So here is U.S. inflation from the beginning of our country all the way to the present. And before we get to what's happened under President Obama and President Trump, it is good to just point out that in the beginning of the country we had vast swings between inflation in red and deflation, where the prices are actually dropping because you're having some type of economic distress or depression, etc. And these wild swings are very unstable for a country and for an economy. And I just want to point out that after the Great Depression here, you really don't see the vast deflation swings anymore. You do see high inflation during periods in the 40s, 50s, and 70s, but maybe the federal government and the Federal Reserve figured out a way to moderate those extremes, which we would say is definitely a positive thing. So if we're looking here from 2008 to 2016, this is the inflation, or the consumer price index, while former President Obama was president. And you can see that when he came into power, inflation was almost at 6%. If you remember back that far, people were really worried about gas prices. Gas was close to $4 a gallon. And this would go hand in hand with the Great Recession. If people don't have money, they aren't going to be buying very much, and prices aren't going to be rising, they're going to be falling as businesses try to get more and more people in to buy things that they don't have the money for. So we actually did go and dip into deflation for a short period of time, and then things sort of moderated a little bit. Now what you should know is the key number here is 2%. This line going all the way across. That is the Federal Reserve's target for where they want inflation to be. And so you might ask yourself this question: why is some inflation good? Well, if you're increasing population and you're increasing productivity and economic growth, then you should have some small amount of inflation every year as people compete to buy new things, etc. But you don't want too much because obviously, well, we're going to go into this in future modules, but you don't want too much because it decreases the value of your currency. But a small amount is good. And you can see that when former President Obama handed it off, he handed off just below 2%, and it sort of bounced a little bit above, a little bit below 2% for much of his presidency. Prices were not a major factor of his presidency. So if we go forward, this is inflation under Trump so far. You can see that the trend seems to have continued. A little bit above 2%, a little bit below 2%, and the Federal Reserve believes that that will continue forward for quite a while. What's interesting about this is that there were big speculations that when Trump became president, inflation was going to start increasing massively. Now, why would that be? He had talked about $1 trillion infrastructure package, where the government was going to spend $1 trillion rebuilding bridges, roads, etc. Well, all that spending is going to flush a lot of money into the economy when you pay all those construction workers and all those firms and all those workers. And at the same time, he's going to deliver a huge tax cut, which gets the middle class and the upper class spending more and more. So everybody is thinking that inflation is going to go up. But in the first year of his presidency, that has not happened. You can question why. Whether it's because he hasn't been able to pass those pieces of legislation yet or what. But if I move forward, the Federal Reserve has talked about confronting this new reality where they have both low inflation and low unemployment. And this brings up a key concept, which is that normally inflation and unemployment head in opposite directions. If you have very low unemployment and everyone has a job, then everybody is spending money and prices begin to rise. We're going to go into this in much more depth later on. But if people do not have jobs and unemployment is high, then inflation is going to be very low because people are not spending money. And so this is a new thing for the Federal Reserve. We've never really had a long period of low inflation and low unemployment. So you can pause the video and give give President Trump and former President Obama a grade on stable prices. We're going to do this in two parts. So we're going to pause the video here, and you can move on to part 2 of this video, where we go to their next 3 classes.